to be talking and echoing around the chamber. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor Paul Gittings. I chair the Strategic Environment Planning and Transport Committee. We'll welcome everybody to tonight's meeting. Councillors are required to attend in person following the expiry of the Coronavirus Act regulations, which permitted online meetings. We'll be using the equipment connecting the chamber into a Microsoft Teams meeting, and some of the officers involved this evening will be joining us remotely by Teams. There is a live stream available through Teams, and a recording of the meeting will be uploaded to the website afterwards. I also need to inform everyone present that this meeting will be recorded and broadcast live on the internet through Teams, and a recording of the meeting will then be uploaded and available for repeat viewing on the council's website. Okay, so we're being recorded live and we're ready to go. Are there any declarations of interest? Well, none. We've got the minutes of the last meeting, pages 5 to 14. Everybody agreed those minutes? Everybody's happy with them? No changes. And after that, we've got minutes of the Traffic Management Subcommittee, which quite a lot of us attended, 12th of January, and then the minutes of other bodies, Joint Waste Disposal Board, AWE Local Liaison Committee, and the Reading Climate Change Partnership. Well, they're all to be noted. Item 5, petitions. Not been notified of any petitions. So move on to item 6, which is questions from councillors and members of the public. Nothing from members of the public, but we have questions from councillors. Looking to my right to Councillor McElroy. You've got a question for you've got a question for me, but it's going to be answered by Councillor Page. So over to you, Councillor McElroy, with your question number 1.
Thank you, Chair. Many of Reading's permit parking roads are narrow and hard to navigate with even a medium-sized car. Green councillors would like the council to consider updating the permit parking rules and charges to incentivise smaller cars and more environmentally friendly electric cars in permit parking zones. Will the council investigate this and report back? Thank you.
Councillor Page, can you answer my
I thank Councillor McElroy for his somewhat confused question. There is little correlation between the size of a vehicle and environmentally friendly electric cars. Low emission vehicles, electric or otherwise hybrid, are generally no smaller than those that use petrol or diesel combustion engines. If Green councillors want a residence parking scheme that discriminates in favour of, quotes, smaller, unquote, cars, I would invite them to set out the maximum length and width of vehicle that fits their definition. If they also want a scheme that incentivises electric cars, I would invite them to confirm that any incentives, such as reductions in permits for electric or hybrid cars, would require either a matching increase in permit charges for non-electric cars or subsidy from the general council taxpayer. I would point out that it is possible to design a policy for a parking scheme that requires vehicles to be of a certain size or smaller. However, this would require considerable extra staff to manage and monitor applications, as I'm advised by our parking services staff that DVLA documentation and their database do not give dimensions of a car, only the weight. Once the Greens clarify the basic parameters of their proposal, I would ask traffic and parking services officers to examine the implications for our residents' parking areas. Thank you, Chair.
Got a supplementary?
Yes, please. Excellent. Is this an early indication that the lead councillor intends to pass his crown to the Greens for all transport strategy, or just this one aspect, Chair?
What green parking strategy? This is the parking strategy that encourages more cars in bus lanes to undermine our excellent public transport system. Confused is an understatement, Chair. I invite Councillor McElroy to send me this strategy, as I've said, with those parameters indicated, and we'll quite happily look at the implications for our schemes. But I know there is no such strategy.
There's a challenge for Councillor McElroy, who's now going to ask you another question, question number 2. So over to you, Councillor McElroy.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, Reading's air is polluted, impacting on all of our health. Green councillors have been asking about an electric vehicle charging strategy since the lamppost chargers were installed in 2019. What is the delay in producing this strategy and when will it be published? Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Page.
Apologies. I thank Councillor McElroy for his question. A draft electric vehicle infrastructure strategy will be brought to the next SEPT committee in June with a recommendation to undertake a subsequent period of public consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Supplementary? No. Happy with you're happy with that? Excellent answer. Decision book references? No, none received. Item 8, the Highway Asset Management Annual Update Report. Mr. Seal. I'm having one of those days, Tony, as you know, Mr. Sheen, Seal. It's a chap I used to work with called Seal, doesn't matter.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I'm Sam Sheen, the Highways and Traffic Services Manager.
I worked with the Sam Seal actually, but just ignore me tonight.
No problem.
I'll just sit here.
The report before you tonight is the annual report we bring to this committee to provide a progress on the current financial year's asset management program on the public highway. The report covers three main areas: an update on the reduced investigatory policy for defects, potholes, how we got on over the last year. It also seeks to amend the A-Board policy to improve on-street management and enforcement, and an overview of the annual status option reports, which we call ASORs, for structures, bridges and carriageways. So on the reduced defect pothole investigatory level, the committee last year approved a reduction of the actionable carriageway defect from a minimum depth of 50 millimetres over an approximate area of 300 millimetres by 300 millimetres to a minimum of 40 millimetre depth, but also using a risk-based assessment that the highway inspectors have done. The report shows a table showing the actual defects repaired last year has reduced substantially, thereby reducing the risk to the council and showing that we can continue using this reduced investigatory criteria going forward. There's also been a substantial reduction in the number of contacts and complaints we've received regarding defects and potholes over the last year, supporting the success of the program. There is also very encouraging satisfaction survey results from residents showing an improvement over last year that we're heading in the right direction. With regards to the A-Board policy, following the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent need to support business recovery in the town centre, the enforcement of the A-Board policy was reduced, but this inadvertently created incidents of obstruction on the public highway and for other users of the public highway. In view of this, the enforcement is to be tightened up and increased to ensure compliance with the policy, and we've attached an amended policy for this committee to approve. The highway inspectors are due to commence enforcement first with a polite visit and a letter to all applicants, owners of A-boards, giving them 28 days to apply for their license, and then action for any non-compliant A-boards will follow thereafter. The ASORs, the annual status option report, this is just a brief summary of where we're heading. It's an asset management tool that we use to report the condition, the asset value, the historical spend that we've had on these structures, and future spending requirements of the highways, structures, carriageways and pavement assets. They assist us by targeting the available funding to assets in greatest need, thereby extending the life of the asset before it becomes necessary to carry out more expensive reconstruction. The carriageway ASOR is already showing encouraging signs where we've improved the residential road condition, that's an unclassified road network, to over 77% green condition. And this is from the funding, the £9 million funding we got from the council for residential roads and pavements over 3 years, commencing in 2020. This is an improvement up from 35% green prior to the start, and more investment is following, which will further improve this indicator this year and in the years going forward. The ASOR in the process of being approved by the Highway Asset Management Board, and they will be brought back to the committee in June for discussion and to be published. We therefore ask this committee to approve the recommendations set out in section 2 of this report. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Page.
Chair, can I welcome the report and thank Sam Sheen and all those of his staff who undertake the work associated with the Highways Carriageway action. Without this council's decision to invest money in the £9 million programme referenced on paragraph 4.5, the number of actionable carriageway defects would have gone, I think, in the other direction, because given the scale of government cuts to our budget and the reducing amount that they, the government, are putting towards road maintenance, we would have been in a very, very bad situation. But the investment has clearly paid off and hopefully will continue. And whilst we have a lower level in the capital programme, it's still much more than we had before. And I think it's £1 million a year that we've are rolling forward in the budget that we've recently approved. So that's good news. The other thing I just wanted to comment briefly on and commend to colleagues is the A board policy. I know that there are some colleagues on the council that don't believe that we should tolerate any A boards in the town. We're not of that view, but fully recognise that there is a need for any A boards to be positioned in a way that is safe for all members of the public, particularly those who may be partially sighted. So we cannot tolerate indiscriminate A boards just dotted about wherever the appropriate shop or vendor decides, which is why the new the amended policy makes it quite clear what will happen if a shop or unit proceeds without appropriate approvals. The boards will simply be confiscated by our highways inspectors, who will also monitor regularly whether the A boards that are licensed are in the correct position. A boards properly positioned and responsibly located can play an important part in adding diversity to the town's economy, particularly for smaller independent traders who may be located in some of our arcades that aren't quite so well known. And you think of the old Harris Arcade, even Smelly Alley or Chain Street are places that have gone down a bit during the pandemic, and where obviously we're keen to see a revival in trade, and A boards can play their part in advertising the presence of these businesses. But again, they have to be located responsibly, and that's the whole basis upon which this amended policy is brought to us this evening. The final point I would make is to draw specifically the final paragraph 19 on page 72 relates to community, church and charity organisations who will not be charged a fee but still need to apply for a licence. And my advice to them would be, if they use them regularly, monthly or bi-weekly or whatever, is to get the schedule in advance and get the appropriate approval from the council. So, Chair, nothing further to say but to commend that to colleagues.
Thanks, Councillor Page. Councillor Moore indicated.
Yeah, I just want to ask a question around item 4.5, which talks about the capital investment into residential roads and pavements, which has been so far a big success. Obviously, it's still an ongoing programme. What I would like to ask, if it's possible for future reporting to be available on demand to councillors as to what the current status is of specific roads, which would reduce inquiries from councillors to council services and officers about the current status and future plans of road defect repairs or resurfacing.
Mr. Sheen.
Thank you, Councillor. It's a work in progress. We are moving towards having data available on our website so that we can reduce contacts. You're absolutely right, but it's something that's work in progress. There is we have a detailed assessment program, and we're trialing a new system that's done by a vehicle rather than on foot and visually, and we're still in the process of understanding that data, interpreting it and correlating it with our existing asset management tools. So there's a bit of work for us to do, and it's something we want to bring forward, and it will be available because we want to promote the work that we've done to date, and it will highlight where those roads that are next on the list. What we want to do is get away from selecting by pressure. We want to be entirely selecting by survey results that are done electronically, so that we can have a sound system and that's defendable in court.
Thank you. Councillor Keeping.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy with the trend that's presented at the table on 4.3. Just a question as to whether the data that's presented there is showing only the old actionable limits, or is it showing at some point a change to the new limits?
Thank you, Councillor. The results for 2022 are entirely from the 1st of April, include the 40mm investigatory level. So the levels are down, but as Councillor Page mentioned earlier, a lot of the reduction is probably due to the amount of resurfacing that we've done in the borough, because dealing with a pothole, the best way is to resurface the road and get rid of all the weak points in it, and that is what we're doing and moving forward.
Right, thanks. Any Councillor Carnell?
Thank you, Chairman. We would also like to thank officers for this report. It's very useful, very interesting reading, and I agree with Councillor Page that the pothole numbers are dropping because of the resurfacing programme. But I think it is right to highlight that the council's £9 million capital investment into it did actually originate from the Conservative central government. Thank you.
Well, through me. Councillor, you can't carry on, Councillor Gunn, and other people may want to. Mr. Sheen.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. We have two capital pots at the moment. We have traditionally the local transport plan LTP grant award for carriageway and bridges, and we use about £1 million of that towards road resurfacing. The rest goes towards bridges and footpaths, but it's a small award of about 1.8 million we had last year. The council's 9 million, 3 million over for 3 years, consecutive years that we've had, is over and above that, and that is what has allowed us to accelerate the programme. Traditionally, before we got the council investment, we had to prioritise our major roads because that's the highest volume of traffic and the highest risk for us. And so at the detriment of our residential roads, which is why now the £9 million we got from the council allowed us to concentrate on the residential and classified road network, which would normally be neglected. And that has got us forward and allowed us to get to 77% purely because of the council's investment. So we're still using the DFT money for our major road programme. We're about to spend another £1 million very shortly of theirs, and again in later this year, because we need that for our major roads. Our major roads are our highest risk. They carry the heaviest loads of traffic, and they need they need a constant regeneration.
Thanks, Mr. Sheen, for that.
I mean,
Councillor
I'll just
Page.
come back to Councillor Carnell. That 9 million is money that we, the council, have borrowed, and the revenue costs for which are built into our budget. And you will see if you go back into the budget papers that it is money we have borrowed and we are paying for. Not a single penny of government grant has gone towards that 9 million. It's all resourced by us from within our difficult budget. And the extra, the small amount that we get from government, we spend. But that is separately accounted for. So I appreciate your attempt to be loyal to your party, but on this occasion, nul point. I'm sorry.
I think so that every little bit helps, but it's only a little bit. And as I read somewhere, there was a £10 billion backlog of repairs, road repairs in this country, with the LJ have investigated. So it's a long way to go on this, but Thank you very much, Mr. Sheen, for your report. So that report. Recommended action, the committee notes the progress of the investigatory level safety defect criteria potholes. 2.2, we approve the updated policy of management of A boards. And 2.3, we note the update of the annual status options report as saw. Is everybody happy with that? All right, thank you. Thank you, members. Thank you, Mr. Sheen. Great. Okay, we move on to item 9, which is the strategic transport update. And Chris Maddox is here to present this. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Right, so this is the regular report that comes to this committee every time. There's quite a lot in it, so I'll just run through a few of the highlights. We've had the funding confirmation from the DFT for the BSIP funding award. So we had the indicative allocation, and there was ongoing discussions with the department, but that has now been confirmed for over 26 million. So that's a mixture of capital and revenue funding for the programme set out at paragraph 4.4 of the report. Just in terms of BSIP progress, the main thing to report is the launch of the all-day ticketing discount scheme, which we launched last week with the main operators in the borough. So this is £3.50 or £3.40 bought via an app for unlimited travel within the Greater Reading area for the day. And it's on all the 3 main operators within the borough as well. So we haven't had any usage figures as yet, but we're hoping it's going to be really, really successful. And it complements the national £2 single fare scheme, which the government recently extended for another 3 months to the end of June. We have had some feedback from operators that is being used, particularly on the longer routes within the borough. So our £3.50 all day travel would obviously be better value if you were doing more than a single trip, but they do complement each other. Other highlights include progress with Green Park Station and Reading West Station, construction of those schemes. The lift scheme at Tilehurst Station, Network Rails recently released a press release about that with further comms to come in due course. Got our big active travel programme, so delivery of the Shinfield Road scheme continues on site. And we've done the statutory traffic regulation order consultation for the Bath Road scheme now. And we've also been awarded 124,000 revenue funding from the department for the Active Travel Capability Fund. So this is more around training and incentivisation for active travel. One of the things we're doing is the Innovation Valley Rewards app, which has been really successful and really well used, and people are earning points to use in local shops. So that kind of complements the physical infrastructure that we're putting in place. So yeah, that's it. No decisions, but just to note the funding awards.
Thanks. Thanks, Chris. Mr. Maddox. We'll talk.
Could I propose that you just take each subheading rather than us
sort
of hopping around it, and then we can
do that. So
give it more structure.
Yeah. So obviously the bus service improvement plan programme is extensive. Anybody want to speak?
Could I just on that, just to on paragraph 4.4, the further public consultation will be taking place after the local elections. We've got PERDA coming up, and that will be an important phase in taking forward what are some critically important capital schemes, particularly for further enhancing the attractiveness and reliability of public transport in the borough. But more of that will follow after the elections.
Any more contributions for the buses? No? Okay. Then South Reading Mass Rapid Transit, it's 4.8 onwards. Anybody want to say anything about that? And then 4.11 Reading Green Park Station. Councillor Page.
It is worth saying that this is all completed, ready to go. We are waiting, as the end of paragraph 4.13 says, we're waiting the all the final approvals and the bureaucratic procedure that is now being taken through with the Office of Road and Rail, or whatever it's called, and Network Rail, and hopefully the opening of the station will take place by the summer, and we and our partners, the timetable has already been approved. The rolling stock, albeit dirty old diesel, is there ready to operate the service, and we just await those essential approvals.
Thank you very much. Green Park. I think we're all waiting with bated breath for the official opening. Reading West Station upgrade in a few of our wards. No, I'm very happy with that, and the Tyler Station upgrade, which I know Kentwood councillors are pleased with. A lot of lobbying there. Okay, and then the two lots of active travel tranche 2 and 3 reports, which Mr. Maddox has referred to in his given an update in his introducing this. It's moving along. Councillor Hornsby-Smith.
Yeah, just on the Shinfield Road, it's great to see the progress that's been made. Looks really good, and we've already seen cyclists going up and down it. So even the bits that have been made, so it's going to be a real success. So thank you to your team,
including me.
If anybody wants to buy a photo of Tony on a bike,
yeah,
that photo.
Reading Cycle Campaign will be looking at that assiduously.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with what Councillor Hornsby-Smith has said about this cycle lane, or these cycle lanes on either side of the road. I would just ask, they just start. Should we not have some form of barrier protection for cyclists, for motorists who are coming along, and suddenly the car part of the carriageway narrows, but there's no real indication?
Mr. Mellick is about starting.
Yeah, so we're kind of partway through construction at the moment. Some of the sections, the kind of physical segregated cycle lane has been built, but not all of the signage and the lining is in place yet. So once everything's in place, it will be a lot clearer for everybody. And that includes double yellow lines as well, so we won't have any parking within the cycle lane. So yeah, I take the point at the moment, it's a bit of a work in progress, but it will be a lot clearer once the full scheme's done.
Yeah, thanks for that question. That's good. Any more covering that, and then in this, the active travel capability fund, and we want another extension of that. We've given money, which is good, and finally, School Streets programme. Good. So from the chair, let's hope for some more. Okay. All right. Well, that's very extensive coverage there. So we're asking 2.1 to 2.3 to note the progress made, to note confirmation has been secured from the Department of Transport for a full allocation of 26.2 for the BSIP, and to note the funding of 124,000 for the active travel capability. We're happy to note all that. Everybody, yeah. Agreed. Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Alex, on that. We move on to the item 10 is the Transport for the South East Strategic Investment Plan, which is page 85 onwards. So, Mr. Maddox.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this is Transport for the South East, of which we're a constituent member along with the other 5 local authorities within Berkshire. They developed their transport strategy, which sets out their kind of 30-year vision to 2050. So this strategic investment plan kind of, I guess, sits within or underneath the overarching strategy and sets out their kind of investment priorities for that period. So it's obviously, you know, a big area and quite extensive, and lots of different things within it. There are some specific schemes of more relevance to us in Reading, including improvement to rail links, so Western and Southern rail access to Heathrow, improvements to the Reading Basingstoke line and the North Downs line as well. They do reference things such as the mass rapid transit schemes within Reading and our kind of programme of bus enhancements, which is dominantly through BSIP at this stage. There's also reference to the proposed new Thames crossing east of Reading, which is currently a scheme led by Wokingham Borough Council, and also a kind of Berkshire-wide active travel infrastructure package. So obviously a lot of our active travel schemes form part of that, and the other authorities are doing similar type schemes within their areas. So the report summarises the results of the consultation that TFSE undertook last year. We did respond to that consultation ourselves. One of the key points that we made was around the fact that they have these different themes. We felt the decarbonisation and environment theme was really the top priority, whilst recognising the importance of the other themes as well. And that should really, be brought out as strongly as it possibly can be within the document was our main piece of feedback, particularly things such as public transport, walking and cycling, and electric vehicles as well, kind of encompasses part of that. So Annex A includes the final version of their strategic investment plan. The next step for Transport for the South East is to submit this plan to government. All of the sub-regional transport bodies are preparing these and submitting them to government. So the committee's asked to endorse the decision for us to agree effectively for TFSE to submit this to government. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Page.
Chair, I should also initially declare an interest as I'm Vice Chair of Transport for the South East as well. And I suppose it's just worth emphasising also that the government is paying via the Department for Transport for a lot of the work that TFSE is now doing, and paragraph 10.2 on page 93 references this. Those of us who were around at the start of the unforgettable coalition experience that we had in this country will remember that Mr. Pickles dismantled with a great fanfare anything to do with the word regional, was put to the sword. And we said at the time, this is just silly, because there are many things such as transport and infrastructure planning that need to be looked at a bigger area than a unitary or a county or even a sub-region. But no, Mr. Pickles knew best. Anyway, a few years later, roll forward, the government's actually paying money to recreate regional bodies of the size of TFSE. And this is a recognition across the country, by the way. They're paying money for other regions to do similar work. We are well ahead of the game in the southeast, and the document that's in front of us represents compromises inevitably when you bring together large rural counties with ambitious urban unitaries such as Reading, the Solent area, Portsmouth, Southampton, Brighton on the south coast have a more ambitious timetables than some of the more rural areas. And clearly with our net zero target of 2030, we were saying, look, your 2050 target is somewhat relaxed. And unfortunately, the majority, there was a minority view on the TFSE led by the urban unitaries that should be a more ambitious target. But we are a small area relative to the county. So the 2050 target sits in there, but with the recognition that there will be many areas within the southeast with more ambitious aspirations or more ambitious targets. I'm also pleased the quid pro quo around that sort of compromise was a recognition, and page 119 draws this out about road user charging. And this is a recognition in paragraph 1.4. It's the black hole I think I referred to the other evening, that around the funding of future transport investment, there's going to be a need with the arrival of more electric cars for a more consistent and effective mechanism of charging for the use of our highways. And 1.4 is that recognition. The scheme's already in, the technology is already there. It requires political will and a combination of pressure from the Treasury, plus hopefully a change of government in the near future, will see more progress made. Because what is lacking at the moment is the ability for people to have drawn to their attention the cost of making travel choices. Because public transport, you are already paying for the upfront investment in a very transparent way, and the real cost of motoring, and many people have essential journeys to make, is still disguised through the very complicated and confused taxation system that we have in this area. So that's a welcome development. And in terms of the local schemes, Chair, on page 88, we have a number of schemes that have been dear to our heart for many years: Western and Southern Rail links to Heathrow, the improvements that are long overdue in spite of 2 successive franchising rounds referencing the service to Gatwick, which is lamentable. Very poor frequency, very poor rolling stock, and the need for improvements to Heathrow Airport bus access. The Thames crossing east of Reading sits in there currently, but I can assure colleagues will be the subject of an opportunity for discussion and review as part of the local transport plan when it comes forward for discussion in the summer. So that's an important qualifying, but we were keen to ensure that that sat within the programme of schemes that TFSE acknowledged as important cross-boundary proposals. So, Chair, I'll wrap it up at that point and would commend this to colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Page. You could never have guessed that you were Vice Chair of this body, but very comprehensive. And I was drawn. I was drawn to page 119 as well with some of the interventions, and I was going to ask a sort of a question for the chair: is what chance do we think of those being implemented at the moment? Because there's some quite radical proposals there. So, and did they gain sort of all party support, Tony, on the Council page?
I think one of the value of the work that, sorry, I mean, we shouldn't really be having a dialogue, Chair, but the answer is yes, that this was the subject of a lot of discussion, and certainly there is a recognition across all parties that the current regime is not fit for purpose, and there needs to be a more transparent and durable regime, particularly recognising that we are transitioning to the use of more electric vehicles, although some of us obviously would like to see that sitting alongside the promotion of much better public transport at the same time, so that the use of those electric vehicles can be kept to a minimum whilst we encourage alternatives.
No, thanks for that. Around for anybody else want to speak to this item? We're asked to note the report, so I think it's a very interesting report. Let's hope it's implemented sometime soon. Okay, everybody agree to note it? Good, thanks very much, everybody. Okay, we move on to item 11, which is the adoption of the Rights of Way Improvement Plan. So, Mr. Maddox again.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, so this is our Rights of Way Improvement Plan. This report follows the report brought to this committee in November, where we presented a draft version of the strategy and sought authority to undertake the statutory public consultation on that document, which was granted. So we then undertook the consultation for 12 weeks as per the guidance, started in November and concluded last month. So we had some good engagement, both with statutory consultees, but also with members of the public as well. So we had a survey online. We had some really good overarching support for the overall kind of objectives and vision and key themes of the ROIP strategy, and also lots of really good individual comments about specific elements, or as part of the right of way network more generally. So this, just to note, that statutory consultation did follow the initial consultation we undertook last summer, where we had a few more responses actually, and some more kind of higher level responses and feedback, which did help inform development of the strategy. So we've taken all of that on board. We have made some additions to the draft ROIP document, particularly around trying to, I think there was a sense from some of the responses that some of the kind of responsibilities within the council, but also with private landowners of rights of way wasn't particularly clear to them. So we've tried to set that out a bit more clearly within the document itself to hopefully help people if they have a query or an issue with the rights of way network. We've also added a separate section around potential funding sources, noting a lot of the kind of interventions and aspirations of the strategy are currently unfunded, just to set out some of the current funding sources that could be applicable. Obviously things can change more moving forward, and also just generally some updates and additions to the strategy just to help clarify some of the points raised through the consultation. But I think overall we've got some really good feedback, particularly from statutory consultees. Paragraph 4.12, we've summarised some of those responses. So, and I think, just the other point to made this before, I think, but rights of way is obviously, the network's important within its own right, within the borough, but, in our view, linkages to the wider walking and cycling network within Reading is as important, because you wouldn't necessarily just walk on a right of way, you'd walk on a whole journey. And also, being a relatively small urban authority, those linkages to the rights of way network in neighbouring authorities, which are much more extensive, I think is really important. So we tried to kind of bring both of those out throughout the document. So our final version of the strategy post consultation is Appendix A. Thank you.
Mr. Marks. I've got Councillor Page indicated, and after that, Councillor Terry.
Chair, again, thank you to officers for the work they've done. I would particularly draw attention to paragraph 4.15 that the ROIP and its appendices are a live document. It's obviously something that is important for us to monitor, but we do rely on many members of the public to act as our eyes and ears, and unlike highways inspectors who will be focusing their attention on roads and streets that we referenced earlier, the rights of way don't get obviously walked on quite the same frequency. So we do encourage and rely on members of the public to alert us if there are concerns, either about obstruction or potential issues around the surfacing. The other thing I'd just like to draw to attention of colleagues is that it's not very often that we get the British Horse Society congratulating us in quite the effusive terms that are set out on page 223. So I'll certainly be banking that, but I would ask it's a typo. I mean, I see the draft of this report, Chair, and I have to confess I missed the typo. There are two on page 223. The Society thanks Reading Borough Council for talking. Well, we do plenty of that, but I think in this, for taking equestrian needs seriously. And down at the bottom, we have the Pang Valley Pambler group. I think there's a P&R brought the Pang Valley Rambler group of the Ramblers Association. But nonetheless, we've had some very strong and welcome endorsements, and I thank those colleagues and groups for the trouble that they have taken in assisting us in bringing this forward. Thank you, Chair.
It's our absolute top priority. Councillor Terry.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to welcome the report. I think it's a great report, and it's important that we do capture all this information and understand where the rights of way are. And I was going to just note the responses that you've received, those comments, very complimentary about the work that council officers have done, so well done. I do sometimes wonder when those creep in, those typos, whether somebody's winning a bet or losing one, to see whether councillors will pick it up. Just checking that we've read all the documents. I mean, not to bring ward work into committee, however, I do think that the rights of way consultation may have led to some owners in my ward wondering whether they need to be clear about where the rights of ways are or not. We aren't clear about that, and Councillor McElroy, because I know it's something as a resident, we haven't had time to put it out yet, but we've arranged for a site visit on the 3rd of April at 1 o'clock with officers to come down and have a look with us and just check what's going on. We have noted that there's a deadline of 2026, so if there are any issues there that need to be resolved, obviously we want to get on and sort them out as soon as possible, and hope that they're not forgotten or lost rights of ways, which will take a lot more time to resolve. But I suspect that's not the case, and that hopefully it will be simply resolved, and that the landowner has simply gone, oh, I better mark out which bits are mine and which aren't. So we'll look forward to seeing that, but thank you for the report.
Thanks. Terry, I'm going to take Councillor Hornsby-Smith and then.
Yes, just a brief comment. I noticed that some of the feedback was talking about removing some of the gates that are in place, the staggered gates, the chicanes. I would be concerned, I know that somebody in the report actually is opposed to that. I would be concerned that I can see, on the one hand, you've got the advantage if you remove the gates, that it's easier for cyclists. But there's also the reason that they were presumably put in there in the first place was because cyclists were abusing it and going down far too fast along these paths. And so the gates were introduced as a means of slowing them down. So I would just caution sort of going ahead with any removals without sort of due awareness of, well, I'm sure you are aware, but of the potential conflict between cyclists and pedestrians. Thank you.
I mean, I think it's also to do with motorcycles.
Yeah, it's a really important point, and it's a really difficult one because clearly we want, the rights of way to be used as much as possible, and there are accessibility concerns sometimes with some gates and barriers and things that are put up. So we need to take that into account, but also, as you say, there's normally a reason why they've been put in, whether it's antisocial behaviour, whether it's things like motorcycles or other vehicles or speeding cyclists. So there's lots of things to consider, and it's normally on an individual basis we need to look at it, and there isn't a one size fits all. So yeah, and we have had competing views through the consultation on it as well. So it's definitely something we need to consider on an individual basis and take views into account before we did anything, definitely.
It's a hot topic because things like cargo bikes and heavier bikes, they're quite difficult to lift over barriers or go through. So yes, Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. I broadly welcome this plan. I think I'm very pleased to see lots of engagement with it, lots of responses. I just want to pick up a thread from Councillor Page. I completely agree with him about people needing to be the eyes of ears because we can't check all the rights away. I'd just like to ask, what would be the correct mechanism for members of the public to feedback when they see things they think should be picked up on? Should that be through a local councillor? Should it be through a specific way to contact the council? What would be the best way to do that? Thank you.
Well, Councillor, Mr. Allen.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We've got our team email address, transport@reading.gov.uk. So that's an easy way for people to put something to our attention initially. Yeah, we do get things fed back through ward councillors, through MPs as well. Sometimes there's various ways people can contact us. What I would say is, obviously, if we do have a report of something, then we will then obviously go out and look at that. Whilst we can't necessarily patrol all of the rights of way, all of the time. Obviously, if something's brought to our attention, we will go and look at that and then engage with whoever it is and see what we can do. And there's various kind of more statutory processes depending what it is. Obviously, initially a conversation might be able to resolve it, but if not, then there are processes that we can follow to do that.
Well, I was going to ask, actually, we tried to discuss about this earlier, about how easy is it to establish a right of way. I think it's touched on page 244 and 245, but say on a particular ward, or say someone says, well, that's a right of way, and it's not. How will we establish as a right of way, Chris?
Yeah, so there's two main ways, both of which are a bit convoluted in some ways, but it's either we could establish it through the fact that historically it was a right of way which has been lost, and if there's evidence to that effect, then that can be used. The other way is if it's been regularly used by the public over a long period of time, yeah, even if it isn't a historic right of way, then there's that evidence can be gathered and submitted, and that can be another way we can do it. So there's various things that we can do.
Can I ask, is that time consuming and or costly or both exercise?
A little bit. I mean, really, so the way that we would go about it is we would ask whoever's kind of come forward with that to provide some evidence to us initially, and then if there's some evidence there to work with, then it would be kind of a bit of a mixture in terms of ourselves and the legal team within the council preparing that documentation for submission to the Secretary of State. So it is a bit of a long process, but there is a statutory process to follow, and clearly if then something is then designated as a right of way, that's really important because then it will stay that way in the future. So
okay, thanks for clarification. Thanks for the work on this. Somebody else indicating, so we're asked to note the progress outlined in this report and approve the formal adoption by the council of the final version of the public rights of way improvement plan 2023 to 33. Fully agreed? Tremendous. Okay. All right. Thanks very much. So move on to item 12, the local plan review and local development scheme. And I'm looking to Mark Warringham.
Thank you, Chair. So the Council's local plan, which sets out the planning policies and proposals up to 2036, was adopted in November 2019. We have a statutory obligation to carry out a review of a local plan within 5 years of its adoption, which in this case means by November 2024. The purpose of the review is to identify whether the plan and its policies are up to date or whether they're in need of update or replacement. There's no obligation to have completed any resulting update within the 5 years, but it does make sense to advance and update as far as possible to avoid having gaps in policy once those 5 years are up. So a review of the local plan has been carried out and is attached as Appendix 3 of the report. The review has identified a need to update about half of the 90 policies in the plan. These updates are required for a variety of reasons, including changes in legislation, new national or local policy, changes on the ground, and other issues that have arisen during implementation. The conclusion is therefore that the Council should progress a partial update of the plan. It's important to note that the review doesn't come to a conclusion on precisely how policy should be updated, which is for a later stage of the process, which involves full consultation. Nor does it exclude any other policies from being brought into the scope of the update at a later stage should circumstances change or more information become available. What's particularly driven the need to update the plan is the changing national policy approach to identifying need for new housing, and national policy is clear that if this is the case, then there will always be a need to update the relevant policies. In this case, there is a national methodology that's been in place since the end of 2020, which results in significantly higher housing numbers being generated in large urban areas, including Reading. So updating housing figures then has a knock-on effect through the plan on other policies that relate to housing, in particular those allocating sites. However, not all identified updates relate to that matter. So having identified the need for an update, Appendix 4 of the report contains a local development scheme, or LDS, which sets out the timetable for progressing this and other planning policy documents. The Council's progress in plan production will be judged against this LDS. So in terms of the partial update, the aim will be to have submitted to the Secretary of State by the end of the 5-year review period in November 2024 to ensure that at least at that stage we have some advanced draft policies that we can rely on in considering planning applications. So committees recommended to agree the proposed partial update of the local plan should be carried out and that the local development scheme setting out the timetable also be agreed. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Warringham. Councillor Lang, did you want to say something?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mark, for your comprehensive report. I mean, this is a live document. I've been getting feedback and some comments from councillors, and it just proves to me, I remember when I first presented at policy committee, I said how we view our lives through a prism, and we can have different focuses on different policies. So depending on the council that comes back to you, they will be asking about a different policy. I'd just like to go back to the recommended action. Not only is there 2.3s, by the way, which is spotted by Councillor Keeping. I think they do put these things in to make sure we do read the papers. Yeah, but it states, as Mark said, the Assistant Director for Planning, Transport and Regulatory Services be authorised to include additional policies within the scope of the partial update in consultation with Lead Councillor Planning for Assets and other relevant Lead Councillors as required. But that also means that obviously councillors can contact and have an input at all times. This is a very fluid report. Obviously, there's 45 of the 90. Mark did mention it, but the elephant in the room for me is the 35% urban uplift. You know, I could go into the calculations about what it is, but as we say, this is not a discussion. I'm glad to say on a personal level, we've got the build to rent stuff coming in, climate emergency, and it's all interlinked. There's a lot of crossover between policies, so if tall buildings aren't getting looked at, that would be picked up, I would think, within town centre living and stuff like that. And yes, that's about it. I'll just thank Mark again for his patience with us. We keep contacting him and inputs from different councillors. Okay.
So,
thank you,
Councillor Lang, well, we've got 2.3s as we point out, but in the first 2.3, you're asking the word. It says the other relevant lead councillors. You could put other councillors.
Yeah, and
so
input from.
Yeah, so we could actually we could probably lose the word relevant lead councillors and put other councillors as required. You see what I'm getting at? It's a broader brushstroke. Yeah, other lead councillors and members. Yeah. So other relevant lead councillors and members. We can just add the word and members.
Feedback.
Members as required. It's just in making it a bit more all-embracing because I think that's important.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to inform members that I did write over 1,000 words for this last night, and then I thought we don't really want this debate. No. And you know that I do slightly go over 5 minutes and I did mention the Central Eastern Berkshire joint management and all the rest of it in there.
It is very all-encompassing, the local plan, and very important, and covers a vast number of areas, 45 which need updating, I think.
It is, and when you read one policy, it automatically takes you to another policy, and as we will find out in the next report that we come to, the H8.
Unfortunately, we don't seem to be, with nobody else indicating. Oh, but Councillor McElroy.
Thanks, Chair. I think the idea that inequality can be solved through general economic growth has been conclusively disproven by reality. To put that in the context of what we're talking about today, I think the central assumption that adding new properties to the Reading edition of the Monopoly board that's very late in that game, the idea that these new squares will end up in the hands of the people who needs them is probably a bit iffy. I guess the main point I want to make is it seems to me that the main interest of this work is that it's about implementing the Tories' national agenda. I don't see as much interest. Like I see some mentions, but not substantive or practical interest in responding to some of the huge changes to society since the last review of the local plan. For example, the economic crisis, or even the latest IPCC report, where it seemed the scientists had had enough of ambivalent political responses that unfortunately are not unlike this local plan. Obviously, inequality and environmental degradation are rife and getting worse in Reading. And I just don't think, surely the solution can't be more managed decline and a continuation of a plan that has led so far to more wealth for wealthy landlords. I have some specific questions. Within the review process, when is the point at which residents will be able to get involved? And secondly, it feels like a bit of an opportunity is being missed here. If only a partial update is run, when is the next full update plan, 2030? If that is the case, do we really think that our 2018 policies will be fit for purpose in a changing world until the new ones are adopted in, say, 2030, 2031? Thank you.
Councillor Lang, you should have prepared your extensive overview. A couple of questions there for Mr. Warringham.
Thank you. So, according to the local development scheme, the first consultation stage, which will involve full public consultation, will be after agreement by September, November. So that will be It's unlikely to be a full draft. It's more likely to be a paper setting out a route map towards where we want to go with those policies. So that's the first opportunity. Then there will be a consultation on draft policies before it's submitted in 2024. In terms of when it will be reviewed again comprehensively, I think it's a case of the next 5-year review to see whether that's needed or not. It's taking it every time, and I think the thing it's trying to avoid doing is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If there are policies which are perfectly serviceable, a lot of which are just general kind of development management policies you'd always wish to apply on things like amenity and so on, which rarely kind of change. That will just be something we'll have to look at when we come to the next 5-year review, whether it's a need to comprehensively update the plan. Obviously, as mentioned there, of environmental crisis and so on, most of our environment policies in terms of kind of sustainable design and so on, in terms of biodiversity, are on the list for review and potential update. That's definitely part of the picture.
Well, I'm going to go Councillor Terry because she indicated.
Yeah, Chair, I just a clarification really. Councillor McElroy seemed to suggest that we shouldn't be building things anymore. Maybe I misunderstood what he was saying, but I do have a leaflet just delivered to my house today saying that not enough affordable housing is being built by us. I mean, I think the Greens need to sort of make up their mind, really, don't they? Whether we're going to have, proper planning and building of things that we do need, and for the economy, people need affordable housing, and we need to build them. But then they criticise us for not building things. I'm confused.
Councillor Lane.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is precisely what I didn't want it to turn into, which was politicising the review of the local plan. But in our corporate plan, it says that we are committed to thriving communities and recognise the importance of access to good quality affordable housing and the provision of family housing, something that the Greens voted against. You mentioned the Tories, so I will go into the 35% uplift. Clearly divorces the methodology from local need and expects towns such as us, Reading, to do the heavy lifting. I won't go through the calculation, but the calculation basically would mean that 654 uplifted to 883, yeah, and with also changes to the National Planning Policy Framework mean that the obligation to work with surrounding boroughs, our neighbouring authorities, they are under no obligation to pick up this shortfall. So I think that's very relevant as well. So yeah, let's not politicise this. Let's make the plan. I was speaking to somebody today about the local plan, and it's the most important document strategically that will affect people in Reading. Yeah, this bloke was a developer. We were getting shown around the site, a developer representative, and I said, what do you think about the local plan? Straight over the top. All he was interested in, yeah, and which is what the interest of most residents, right? Inflation, and he was keeping an eye out for the interest rate rise today for his mortgage going up. So when we sit in this room and we concentrate on this, it's our job. We've all got different focuses. We all want the best for Reading. We need to come together and decide these things strategically, move forward. Let's not do cheap political point scoring, so that people out there that are worrying about inflation, worrying about their mortgage, worrying about their rent, worrying about the lack of affordable housing can leave it to us. They're elected representatives. So let's try and be straight. I always say I'm straight down the middle, not always right. Nobody's always right. Well, I try to be left. I've always been a little bit left. So there you go. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not here to make a political point, but more of a question about, as we've now suggested to amend recommending action 2.3 about involving all councillors, what would be the correct mechanism, and this may be too early to ask this, but what will be the correct mechanism for councillors to be involved in suggestions and for what we may change in the local plan?
Because I think from the chair, I think that is important because, as obviously Councillor McElroy's made his comments, but if we let all councillors have an input, I mean, nobody's going to suggest that every input from a council be into the plan. but some would be, and you know, ideas around affordable housing and things like that.
Just wondering what is the best way
so
to
what
do
is the
that?
mechanism?
Well, I mean, I'm perfectly happy to take any councillor's view as we carry on forward, and that will obviously need to be discussed with lead councillors as we move forward.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's not my decision to make, but we have a steer group, and it's up to us on that steer group to act as a conduit, you know, to councillors, all members, I should say, and get feedback, and then we put that forward to officers and see what's possible, see how it fits in with what they decided already, because they've already been, you know, more than fairly comprehensive with coming forward. We started originally with 39 policies to look at, and now we're up to 45. Councillor McElroy says it's a partial review, but we're at halfway. It is, but we're at halfway. It's still quite comprehensive review. So, you know, and as I say, there's crossover between policies. So, yeah.
I think it is.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, go Councillor.
I have another question. Is there a plan that, as part of the local plan review, we have a lot of supplementary policies? Is there a plan to review those and roll them into the wider local plan, or keep them the supplementary policy documents?
I think in general the answer would be that supplementary policies are supplementary for a reason, because they are far too detailed and lengthy to be within the plan itself. That said, with the next item on residential conversions SPD, the work that's been done on that has resulted in some things we may want to incorporate within the policy. So there's a bit of a there's going to need to be a bit of that. There's also the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill coming forward now, which ditches supplementary planning documents and establishes a new system of supplementary plans, which themselves would need to go through examination. And there'll be transitional arrangements which aren't necessarily entirely clear yet how that will work. So at some point there will need to be, it looks like we'll need to take our SPDs and turn them into supplementary plans through some kind of formal process as well. But that's all still to be seen. At the moment, what I would envisage is that a plan references existing SPDs to make sure they continue to have weight. And then once we're at that point, we can, once we're at the point where the local plan is adopted, or we've at least got capacity to start that process, we can start turning those SPDs into the new format.
Councillor Page.
Picking up on Councillor Moore's query, if you look on page 4.9, you've got an outline timetable, bills in consultation at various points. So that's the more formal one. And ahead of that, within the authority, we will obviously be talking about this, the administration, but I can assure you, and certainly on the basis of what we did in the run up to the 2019 plan, we ensured that there was proper opportunity within the council for input. So if you've got any particular thoughts, feed them in to Mark initially, but that won't preclude, I mean, he's not, and obviously he can't give a commitment that every suggestion is going to be written in. And we certainly don't want some of Councillor McElroy's wacky ideas suddenly being replicated. And particularly, there's a need for that wider discussion amongst us all. It's in the interests of our local plan review to ensure that we build in those opportunities for consultation. One thing we did very well last time, and it reduced the objections, I think, and the time at the local plan hearing, was that it had already been exposed to a wide range of comments throughout. So it's a case of all of the above. So the timetable here is of course predicated on what the current government has said, and one thing that Councillor McElroy did say that is correct, we're obviously working under what the current government has laid down. They are totally confused as to what they want to do around planning. Councillor Lang's been very charitable on that front. But the changes he's referred to are concessions to backbenchers who don't want further development and expect us to take more. The planning framework is going to be in flux, and there will be a change of government, and quite what that will bring. Some of us are still inputting, but so there's more uncertainty. So we are working very much on the basis of the current rules and regulation, but I would lay a substantial wager that what we have in front of us is not what we'll be dealing with in a couple of years' time.
Okay, thanks. Thanks everybody for debate. Right, we're.
Sorry, Chair, can I?
Right, sorry,
yeah,
Councillor.
you might as well let me have the last word. You might as well wrap up. I mean, we weren't going to say anything. We end up saying stuff, but you know, to come back on the SPD. You know, SPDs usually are brought up to deal with change. So we, in particular, with the affordable housing SPD, and within that was a small bit on the build to rent. So we've asked for this to go into the local plan to look at. It's important because it's an ever-changing thing. At the moment, we've got 315 on one development, 599 under construction, 422 have planning, and we have to ask ourselves, where does this fit in with our future affordable housing policy when you've got rent levels which are in effect protected by individual conditions on each development? If you're going to have that many houses, that's not the best way to move forward. So, you know, I'm not jumping the gun, but I would say that was something that we would need to look at in the future. So when we say it's a live document and it's fluid and Mark listens to our suggestions, that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Link. Cutting you off. Yeah. Right, okay, the recommended actions.
Sorry, Mr. Warren.
2.1 to, we're going to, obviously it will be 2.4. It's not as printed in the, we note results of local plan review, agree that a partial update of the local plan be undertaken. Then the Assistant Director is authorised to include additional policies in the scope of the partial assessment with lead councillors of planning and assets, other relevant lead councillors and members as required. So people get their chance to have their say. Well, that's if we agree to that 2.3. And 2.4, that the committee agree the local development scheme which sets out the timetable. All agreed? Great, thank you, everybody. Okay, we move on. And Councillor Lang has already flagged up to the adoption of the residential conversion supplementary planning document. Mr. Warringham.
Thank you, Chair. So this report concerns the residential conversion supplementary planning document, or SPD. And as we've just discussed, an SPD is a form of document providing detailed planning guidance on a specific topic. In this case, the document provides detail on how the policies on conversions of a house to flats or to a house in multiple occupation will be applied. A draft version of this SPD was agreed by Policy Committee for consultation in December. Consultation then took place up to 13th of February this year, and the comments received have been considered and amendments made to the SPD. These amendments are summarised in the report, but they include increased recognition of heritage and a more user-friendly worked example of the proposed threshold approach. So the recommendation is adoption of the document, and that will significantly clarify and improve the approach to dealing with proposals for conversions to flats or multiple occupation. Committee is therefore recommended to adopt, and once adopted, the SPD will be used to guide planning applications alongside the local plan policy. Thank you.
Mr. Warringham, anybody say? Councillor Link, I know you want to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Warringham, for your comprehensive SPD paper. Where we started from originally was at a planning applications committee, and it was about the thresholds tipping point, 25% within Article 4 areas and dwellings and buildings. That's where it all started from. And months down the line we come here. I mean, I've been through this policy paper, the original. I'm lucky enough to have the original strike through, so I can see all the changes that have happened to this. Some of them small but important to me, and some of them bigger for, you know, the consultation process with Kat, with Evelyn. I know she's had a lot of input, and they seem quite happy with it. I think we've even got a consultation in this comment to the consultation from a councillor, Andrew Hornsby Smith. So it's good. So that's it. You know, I was pleased with the stuff outside Article 4, where it took in the word we don't like to use, deprivation, the broken window effect, which I mentioned before. Also, some of the enforcement stuff, there's some information in there about, which I think is relevant. It's not relevant to this, but I always do, because enforcement's a passion of mine that we follow up on stuff like this. Limited to 4 years, but proposed to be 10, so we can chase up on stuff like that. Sorry, I haven't really written a speech for this. I've just got a load of notes. So what I'm going to do is this tiny bit of language. So we've got changes in how the methodology is done and how we calculate it, and it's been tidied up and given more examples. But one of the little changes, which I think is important, because it will be important, you know, in futures if it comes up in appeal. So in the old document, it said Reading is the home to University of Reading, as well as Reading College, residential conversions, often in the form of houses of multiple occupation, provide suitable accommodation sought by students. Now, we've taken out the word suitable and put in sought. So in future, it's not suitable. It's not always suitable. Just because something is sought, it doesn't mean it's suitable. So there we are. There's a slight change in language. I'm always one for like that because I'm into subliminal messaging and stuff like that. That I was trying. So I've been through this paper quite a few times now. I think it's, if I'm marking it out of 100, it would be 100.5. So I think it's working quite well. Thank you, Chair.
Right, that's for the committee to judge, Councillor Lang, and vote on it. Councillor Hornby-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a point that as one of the people who did make a representation, I was very pleased to see that the wording of something I felt that was necessary to be tightened up was tightened up. It wasn't exactly the wording that I'd proposed, but there was a discussion that was going on, and there was a careful consideration of it. So in the same way that Councillor Lang has mentioned, I think the fact that the officers have taken the trouble to consider each representation and to take on board, you know, a number of changes that will have improved the document, mean that this document is much better and much closer fit for purpose now. And I thank them for the work that they've done in undertaking it. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor McElroy.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I agree, and thanks to officers and, you know, to Councillor Lang, and also shout out to the Reading Conservation Area Advisory Committee for their very detailed submission. I think that it definitely does clarify and tighten up how this works. So pleased to see this go through. I guess the only point to make is the one that I've made previously about the horse having bolted already, and looking forward to, you know, policies outside of how this works for undoing some of the historical harm where possible. But I think we've covered that. So thank you.
I think you've got your microphone still on, so you
yes. Sorry, yeah, just to wrap up. Well, maybe it will happen. I mean, when the SBD, the local plan review is eventually gets seen by Secretary of State in November 24. I think the latest Parliament can be dissolved is that December. So maybe we can get I hope it's Minister Nandy to maybe redefine what is a small HMO. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to the voices of agreement on this, I think it cuts out a lot of the ambiguity that we had before, will make decision making a lot easier, but also will protect communities that are particularly affected by the HMOs that are proposed. So we're in agreement. Thank you.
Good. Okay. Oh, Councillor Moore.
Sorry, just want to make sure I have my say. I agree with pretty much what everything else has said. I mean, HMOs are not exactly a problem in Tilehurst Ward, but I think they do serve a purpose within the large mix of housing within the borough. But this really does help to tighten up how we manage that. And as Councillor Robin said, it will make decision making easier, especially for those on the Planning Applications Committee. I think that'll be really helpful. So thanks to everyone who worked on this to get to where it is.
We agree. Great. Thanks. Good. Okay. We can recommend action 2.1. The results of the consultation be noted. And 2.2, the important proposal that the residential conversions Appendix 3 is adopted as a supplementary plan document. All agreed? Agreed. Tremendous. Okay, we're nearly there. So item 12 is the, item 14 is the external funding application for carbon reduction projects, and Peter Moore has waited very patiently online to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies I can't be there with you in person this evening. This report is just tying up loose ends following submission of 2 funding bids in the last quarter of last year. Under the new constitution, I don't think the requirement to report submission of bids of this scale to the next available committee exists any longer, but at least one of these was submitted under the old constitution, hence the report. And we also thought it was important to keep members cited on the efforts that we're making to leverage external funding to make our own capital investment in this area go a bit further. So the first application was submitted to phase 3B of the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, PSDS for short, back in October. To support installation of ground source heat pumps at the Hexagon Theatre. Now this fund operates on a first come first served basis, which makes the submission of bids quickly and imperative. And as I say within the report, we got our bids submitted within 50 minutes of the window opening. But we learned recently that the fund was actually oversubscribed within 10 minutes. And we just found out a few hours ago, unfortunately, that our bid is not in the list of funded projects. But we do have an allocation for this project in the approved capital programme already, which was put forward as match funding for our successful Levelling Up Fund bid. So subject to revisiting our plans and cutting our cloth to rework the business case, we should still have a heat pump project at the HEX to ensure that we've got a low carbon heating systems there as we prepare for the intensification of uses on the campus with the Levelling Up Fund projects. I don't want to sound bitter, but in 2 decades of applying for grants in this area, I don't think I've come across a system as, what's the word, invidious, should we say, as first come first served. And it's a small comfort that there'll have been hundreds of other applicants like us who will have been, without knowing it, wasting their time if they got their applications in after the 11th minute. The second application, a bit more positive, was to Government's Heat Network Delivery Unit for £118,000 with a match funding contribution of £50,000 from our approved Climate Change Reserve Fund to further develop a heat network proposal to serve the cluster of developments north of the station. So heat networks are key to our sort of low carbon future ambitions, and this exciting project envisages tapping into the heat from the Thames to provide low carbon heating in new buildings. It would be a major multi-million-pound capital project, so there's a lengthy and detailed development process to go through, and this funding from government would help us move to the next stage, having completed feasibility work last year. And I'm pleased to be able to report to the committee that a couple of weeks ago we were advised that our bid had been successful, and in fact they've offered us a little bit more than we asked for, so we got a grant of £150,000 for that work, which will start shortly, and the Finance Director has signed an MOU with Bayes and accepted the grant accordingly, so that's a bit of good news. Another bit of good news, finally, I'm just pleased to update the committee that a third grant application, which was not covered in my report because the work took place at a bit of a canter in February after the report had already gone into the system, was that we've secured a grant of £825,000 from Thames Valley LEP towards a £1.2 million project to replace gas heating at the civic offices with air source heat pumps. And again, this will make a significant contribution to our carbon reduction targets. It's an integral part of our Levelling Up Fund project to ensure that the intensification of uses arising from integrating the library into the civic can be serviced by our low carbon heating and cooling system. Again, I think the CEO and the Finance Director have already accepted the grant offer under delegated authority, so no decision for the committee, but we thought it was important that you were aware of that good news. So in summary, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I welcome any comments or questions from members, and obviously if you can spot any deliberate mistakes I may have made as you've done so diligently on other reports, then please do.
Yeah, 2 out of 3 isn't bad. Actually, the first one, of course, is ridiculous. We're not trying to get tickets for Glastonbury, we're bidding for public money. Councillor Page.
Well, just picking up on that point, firstly to thank Peter Moore and colleagues for the work that they put in to some of these bids. They are horrendously complicated and lengthy, and it must be very frustrating for him and others to have to deal with such a capricious process. What says more about a government's priorities for tackling climate change than having a 2-hour window to bid and then being told that only those within the first 10 minutes. I mean, if that doesn't highlight the contempt with which this government really regards the initiatives for tackling the climate emergency. We heard it from Councillor Robinson in his tirade the other evening. I mean, that's the real Tory party, pretty contemptuous about whether there's even a climate emergency. The government is still got climate deniers. They're kept under the desk, but they're still there. Make no bones about it. And if this doesn't underline the need for Labour's Green Investment Fund that would put an end to this sort of nonsensical bidding and would allow local authorities to bring forward on a planned basis the sort of investment that we need in the Hexagon across our housing stock and a whole range of other local investments. And the sooner that Greener Investment Fund comes, and obviously the sooner a new government, the better. I won't invite Peter Moore to comment on that because, of course, he's a totally impartial officer, but it is just underlines the time that he and other officers of this authority have to put in, which has been essentially wasted by the government. The 825,000 from the LEP is the last money we will be getting from the LEP. It's the last knockings of some millions that were left over from underspends in other areas. But obviously we're grateful for that, but the LEP is being put to the sword at the end of this financial year, as we know, and there will be no further funds from that. Just one quickie, Chair, can I also pass on the thanks of the organ. Most of us attended the working session the other evening, and indeed poor Councillor Carnell turned up late and had to be turned away. So thank you for the at least the effort of coming along, and Councillor Thompson submitted for substituted for Councillor Moore. So we had broad cross-committee representation. I was told in an email today by the organisers that Reading's attendance rate across all categories, and that's the council, voluntary sector, the university and other participants, has been the highest so far of any local authority that has been involved with. And in her words, it was a very knowledgeable group. Great to know that the work in Reading is informed by such a breadth of expertise, and notwithstanding Councillor Robinson being there. Anyway, but thank you seriously to all colleagues for participating in that exercise. Thank you, Chair.
It was an excellent exercise, and I'm glad that we were reviewed well. So, oh, sorry, Councillor McElroy.
Yeah, thanks. Gosh, what a roller coaster of an update that was. I guess first, congratulations on getting those grants in. That must feel very satisfying to get those done. And as for that first one, well, that sounds like it stinks to me. But no more on that. When we've heard about the climate strategy previously, we've heard, and I hope you know what I'm talking about here, a phrase along the lines of, we're doing lots, for example, some of the stuff that we've heard about tonight, but we've also got a long way to go. Does what we've heard tonight make a difference to that assessment in any substantive way, or do we still have a very long way to go? Thanks.
Take the Mr. Morton.
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, still a long way to go is the honest answer, Councillor McElroy. But every little helps, and it just gives us that bit more flexibility within our own capital programme. To do more. The HEX and the Civic are two of our biggest energy users as buildings, so they've obviously been a priority. But there's a lot more within the estate to go after we've sorted them out, and we basically need to get everything off gas if we're going to meet our targets. So it's not a bottomless list, but it's quite a long list.
Okay. Councillor Moore.
Thank you very much. And obviously someone with the same surname as me must be a very hard-working and conscientious individual. So thank you very much for your hard work on that. I especially heard about the heat pumps at the civic offices. I think that's a good way to put your money where your mouth is in terms of the climate emergency. Just on the first one, I can't believe we have such an absurd non-professional system as a first come first serve. How can you possibly judge whether the scheme that's been applied for is of merit or not, purely based on a 10-minute time frame? I mean, Councillor Macaron and Kirkland Page have said it all, and the sooner there's an end to that, the better.
Yep.
Chair,
Okay.
I should clarify that they do technical checks to make sure that bids are compliant and basically pass muster. But it is, the principle in their own words is first come, first serve. So if you're not, that is the ones at the top of the pile go through, and even if you're compliant and have done everything right, you've got to be lucky to get in.
Well, I think we're all agreed that's not the greatest way to give out public money. Okay, the recommended action that we note our submission of our bids, and then the committee delegates agreement acceptance of any grant offers arising from the bids, which we've spoken about. So all agreed? Agreed. Thanks very much, everybody. That concludes the meeting at 8 o'clock. For those that are football fans, it's 0-0 in Italy.